Hello and welcome to a one-take toilet top audiobook production. This series book is Myst, the Book of Donnie, by Rand Miller with David Wingrove. This is the third and final book in the Myst novel trilogy. I am the bathroom reader, covering for the Plurality Report, who is currently wondering just why personal computer home printer technology hasn't progressed almost at all in the last 25 years. Myst, the Book of Donnie, by Rand Miller and David Wingrove. To the dedicated team at Cyan. Acknowledgements. Even as we bring you this third book, which further uncovers the Donnie and their history, we realize that we have merely scratched the surface of this fascinatingly rich civilization, but have added a crucial piece to this ever-enlarging puzzle. And this latest effort that we now present to you could have only been possible with the continuing effort of a core group of dedicated individuals. It is again our pleasure to have uncovered more of these historic and stunning past events of a civilization that continues to live and to teach. Yet this work would not have been possible if not for the assistance of Chris Brandkamp, Richard Watson, and Ryan Miller, along with the long hours spent by our friend David Wingrove. This particular task of discovery was especially rewarding to each of us. So it is again to these four friends that I extend my sincerest thanks. Prologue. A seabird calls. The unknowing one stands at the rail. Peace. The circle closed. The last word written. From the Korok Jima, verses 13,245 to 46. The cavern was silent. A faint mist drifted on the surface of the water, underlit by the dull orange glow that seemed to emanate from deep within the lake. Vast walls of granite climbed on every side, while overhead, unseen, unsensed, a solid shelf of rock, a mile thick, shut off all view of stars and moon. Islands littered the lake, twisted spikes of darkness jutting from the level surface of the water. And there, on the far side of the cavern, one single massive rock, split, yet still standing, like the splintered trunk of a tree, its peak hidden in the darkness. Beyond it lay the city, wreathed in stillness, its ancient buildings clinging to the walls of the cavern. Donnie slept, dreamless and in ruins, and yet the air was fresh. It moved, circulating between the caverns, the distant noise of the vast rotating blades, little more than the suggestion of a sound, a faint, whumping pulse beneath the silence. The mist parted briefly as a boat slid across the waters, the faintest ripple marking its passage. Then it, too, was gone, vanished into the blackness. It was night in Donnie, a night that had lasted now for almost 70 years. In the streets of the city, the mist coiled on the cold stone of ancient cobbles like something living. Yet nothing lived there now, only the mosses and fungi that grew from every niche and cranny. Empty it was, as though it had stood thus for 1,000 years. Level after level lay open to the eye, abandoned and neglected. 1,000 empty lanes, 10,000 empty rooms, a desolate landscape of crumbling walls and fallen masonry everywhere one looked. In the great curve between the city's marbled flanks lay the harbor, the shadows of sunken boats in its glowing depths, and across the harbor's mouth a great arch of stone, Kareth's Arch, as it was known, its pitted surface webbed with cracks. Silence, a preternatural silence, and then a sound, faint at first and distant, and yet clear, the tap, tap, tap of metal against stone. High above, in the narrow lanes of the upper city, a shadow stopped beneath a partly fallen gate and turned to look. The sound had come from the far end of the cavern, from one of the islands scattered on the lake out there. Mist swirled, then silence fell again. And then new sounds, a whirring, high-pitched mechanical screech, followed by the low burr of a power drill, and then the tapping once again, the sound of it echoing out across the water. Kavir. The noises were coming from Kavir. 2 miles across the lake, and there it is, the island rising like a huge black corkscrew from the glowing lake, its once crisp outline softened by a recent rockfall. Coming closer, the noise grows in volume, the sound of drilling constant now, as is the clang, clang, clang of massive hammers pounding the stone. The island shakes beneath the onslaught, the carved stone trembling like a sounding bell. But no one is woken by that dreadful din. The ancient rooms are dark and empty, all that is but one at the very foot of the island, down beneath the surface of the lake. There, deep in the rock, lies the oldest room of all, a chamber of marbled pillars and cold stone, sealed off by an angry father to teach his son a lesson. Now, 40 years on, that same chamber is filled with busy men in dark protective suits. Their brows beaded with sweat, they toiled beneath the arc lights, a dozen of them standing between the 2 big hydraulic props, working at the face of the wall with hammer and drill, while others scamper back and forth, lifting and carrying the fallen stone, stacking it in a great heap on the far side of the chamber. A figure stands beside the left-hand prop, looking on. Atreus, son of Gen, once prisoner in this chamber. After a while, he glances at the open notebook in his hand, then looks up again, calling out something to those closest to him. A face looks up and nods, then turns back. The message is passed along the line. There is a moment's pause, a welcome silence. Walking across, Atreus crouches between 2 of the men and leans forward, examining the wall, prizing his fingers deep into the crack, then turns and shakes his head. He stands back, letting them continue, watching them go to it with a vengeance, the noise deafening now, as if all of them know that one more push will see the job through. Slowly the chamber fills with dust and grit, and then one of them withdraws and, straightening up, cuts the power to his drill. Turning, he lifts his protective visor and grins. All about him the others stand back, looking on. Atreus returns to the wall and, crouching, pushes his hand deep into the crack, edging this way and that, feeling high and low. Satisfied, he eases back and, taking a marker from his pocket, stands drawing an outline on the stone, the outline of a door. At his signal, one of the drill men steps forward and begins to cut along the mark. Swiftly it's done. A dozen hammer blows, and the stone falls away. The stone is quickly cleared, and as the rest look on, Atreus steps forward one last time. He holds a cutting tool with a chunky barrel the thickness of his arm, placing the circle of its teeth about the circle of the lock, a circle that overlaps the thick frame of the door. He braces himself, then gently squeezes the trigger, letting it bite slowly into the surface. Only then, when the cutter has a definite grip on the metal, does he begin to push, placing his whole weight behind it. There is a growling whine, a sharp burning smell, different in kind from the earlier smells of stone and dust and lubricant. And then, abruptly, it's over. There is the clatter of the lock as it falls into the corridor beyond, the descending whine of the drill as it stutters into silence. Setting the drill down, he raises his visor, then pulls the protective helmet off and lets it fall. Atris straightened and, with a single meaningful glance at the watching men, turned back to face the doorway. 40 years he had waited for this. 40 long years. Placing his booted foot against the surface, he pushed hard, feeling the metal resist at first, then give. Slowly, silently, it swung back. A good Donny door, he thought, with good stone hinges that never rust. A door built to last. And as the door swung back, he saw for the first time in a long while the empty corridor and, at its end, the twist of steps that led up into the house, where long ago his father, Gen, had taught him how to write. Where he had first learned the truth about Donny. Yes, and other things too. Eros came and stood by his shoulder. Will you not go through, Master Atris? Atris turned, meeting the young man's eyes. One should not hurry moments like this, Eros. I have waited 40 years. Another 40 seconds will not harm. Eros lowered his eyes, abashed. Besides, Atris went on, we do not know yet whether Donny is occupied or not. You think it might be? The look of shock on Eros's face was almost comical. If it is, Atris said, then they will know we are here. We've made enough noise to wake the dead. Then maybe we should arm ourselves. Against the Donny? Atris smiled. No, Eros. If anyone's here, they will be friends, not foes. Like us, they will have returned for a reason. Atris turned back, looking toward the steps. Then, brushing the dust from his leather gloves and boots, he stepped through into the dimly lit corridor. Part 1. Rivers of fire, even the rocks burn. An island rises from the sea. Dark magic in an errant phrase. The people bow to the Lord of Error. From the Ejama Tarak, Book 7, verses 328 to 31. Seabirds wheeled and called in the air above the bay, a flutter of white above the blue. It was hot, and, looking at the village, Marim drew her hair back from her face, then gathered the braided strands together, fastening them at the nape of her neck. But for her father she would have had it cut like a man's long ago. After all, she did a man's job. Why should she not wear her hair like a man's? But she was loath to upset her father. It was hard enough for him to understand all the changes that had come to Averone, let alone comprehend the urge to explore and understand that had been woken in his youngest daughter. From where she stood on the promontory, the whole of her small world was open to her gaze. For all of her childhood it had been enough. The 6 great circular lodge houses, the river, the broad fields where they had planted the crops, and beyond them the woods where they had hunted and played. World enough until Atris and Catherine appeared. Now she could barely imagine how it had been before they had come, how she had ever survived without this urge in her, this need to know. And now, almost as suddenly as it had begun, it was to end. Only that morning they had dismantled the last of the workshops and cleared the ground where it had been. So Atris had promised the elders of the village when he had first come here. Yet Marim could not understand why it had to be. They had come so far so quickly. Why did it have to end? For certain, she herself could not easily return to being what she was. No, she had changed. And this world, while it still drew her emotionally, was no longer big enough for her. She wanted more. Atris's books had opened her mind to the infinite possibilities that existed, and she wanted to see, if not all, then at least some of those possibilities. And yet tomorrow they would be gone, Atris and Catherine, and all they stood for. There had to be a way to prevent that, or if not, a way of going with them. If only Atris would ask. But even then, there were the elders, her father among them, and they would never agree. As much as they liked Atris, they did not welcome the changes he had brought to Averone. They saw the excitement in their children's eyes, and to them it was a threat. Atris had understood that. It was why he had agreed to destroy all that he had built here once it had served his needs. But he could not destroy what was in her head, nor the seeds he had planted in the heads of others, such as Iras and Karad. Marim knew they shared her frustration. They too felt constrained now by this tiny world of theirs. She let her thoughts grow still, watching the movements down below her in the village. Each of the great lodge houses had 4 large doorways at north, south, east, and west. The massive entrances framed by the polished jarrus trunks, cut from the largest trees in the woods. As she looked, 3 people emerged from the south doorway of her own lodge, their figures tiny against the great boles of the ancient trees, yet she recognized them at once. Atris stood to the left, the distinctive lenses that he wore pulled down over his face, his long cloak hanging loose in the windless air. Beside him, in a long flowing gown of green, stood Catherine, her hair tied back. Facing them, talking to them, was her father. She groaned. Doubtless her father was asking Atris not to interfere, and Atris, being the man he was, would respect her father's wishes. Her spirits low, she began to walk back down to the village, heading toward the river, away from her own lodge and the 3 figures who stood there debating her future. And as she walked, she remembered the first time she had seen Atris and Catherine, that morning when they had, so it seemed, stepped from the air and into their lives. Wide-eyed, the villagers had come out from their lodges to stare at the 2 strangers, while the elders quickly gathered to form a welcoming party. She remembered how difficult that first meeting had been, with neither party able to speak the other's language, and yet even Atris had then found ways to communicate with them. His hands had drawn pictures in the air, and they had somehow understood. He wanted their help. She remembered the gesture clearly, how he had put his arms straight out toward the elders, palms open, and then slowly had drawn them in, as if to embrace something to his chest. In the days that had followed, she had barely let them out of her sight, hovering at the back of a circle of curious youngsters who had followed the 2 strangers everywhere they went. And slowly she had begun to pick up the odd word or two, until, emboldened by familiarity, she had dared to speak to the woman. She remembered vividly how Catherine had turned to face her, the surprise in her eyes slowly turning to a smile. She had repeated the words Marim had uttered, then gently beckoned her across. So it had begun, 4 years ago this summer. Marim smiled, recalling the long hours she had spent learning the Dani tongue, and afterward, in the library on Chroma Agana, how she had sat at her books, long into the night, learning the written script. Even now she had not mastered it fully, but now it did not matter, for tonight, after the feast, they would be gone, the linking book burned, that whole world of experience barred to her, if the elders had their way. The thought of it filled her with dread. It would be like locking her in a room and throwing away the key. No, she thought, worse than that, much worse. Iras found her, crouched on the riverbank. Marim? She glanced up at him, then returned her gaze to the surface of the water. Marim, what is it? She answered without looking at him. You know what it is. Look, I know you're disappointed, Marine, but we all are. But it can't be helped. The elders only let us help Atris on the understanding that once he made the breakthrough, that was it." Marine was silent. She picked up a handful of pebbles and, one by one, began to throw them into the slow-moving stream. Iras watched her a moment, combing his fingers back through his dark, fine hair, then sighing. "Come on, Marine, don't spoil things. You knew this day would come." "I know," she said, "but it's hard. I mean, it's not like going hunting, say, or fishing. There, no matter how far you venture, you come back and you're the same, unchanged. But the journey we've been on—" Iras was silent for a long time, thinking about what she'd said. Then he shrugged. "You'll be okay. You'll settle again." "Maybe." Iras stared at her, surprised by the uncertainty in her voice. Yet before he could speak again to reassure her, Karad came running up, his broad chest rising and falling from his exertions, sweat beading on the big knuckle of his head. "Iras! Marine! You're wanted! Atris has called a meeting!" Marine looked down. No doubt he wanted to thank them and say goodbye before the feast, because there would be no time for informal farewells later on. But right now she didn't feel like farewells. "I saw him," she said, "speaking to my father." Karad nodded. "Mine too!" She looked up. He at least understood what she was feeling. She could see it in his eyes. "I wish—" "What?" she said gently, brought out of herself by the sight of his suffering. "I wish we'd never started this." Yes, but it was too late now. It would have been best for them all if they had never learned about Donnie and books and all the rest of it. But now— Iras's voice broke into her thoughts. "Well, are you going to keep Atris waiting?" Marine looked to Karad, then back to Iras. In appearance, the two young men were like rock and wood, the one so broad and solid, the other so agile and slender. But on the inside they were much alike. "No," she said, knowing that whatever she was feeling, it was not Atris's fault. He had been as good as a father to them, after all. "You're right, Iras. Let us not keep Master Atris waiting." The hut was the last of the new buildings to remain standing, and in an hour or so it, too, would be gone, the dark earth beneath its floor raked over, as if nothing had ever been there on the site. Looking at it, Atris sighed. They had happy times here, working, laughing, teaching the young people how to use their quick and nimble minds. He would miss that. Indeed, it was only now, at the end, that he realized just how much he was going to miss it. Atris turned, looking to Catherine. She was crouched, packing the last of their books into a knapsack. He watched her a moment, the familiarity of her shape, her every movement, ingrained in him. There were lines at her neck now, and a fine web of lines about her eyes and mouth, but these only made her more dear to him. The Donnie blood in him made him age the tiniest bit slower than she, and there was always the consciousness that one day he would be alone, without her by his side. But that only made him savor each moment that much more. She glanced up, noticing him watching her, and smiled. Then, seeing the concern in his eyes, she stood and came across. "What is it?" He hesitated, then, "I wish there was another way." "Is that why you want to talk to them?" He nodded. "And what will you say?" "I don't know, but I feel I ought to say something. As it is, I feel as if we're simply abandoning them." He raised a hand. "I know we agreed to all this long ago, but I didn't know then how I would feel at the end." "I know." There was a sadness in her face that mirrored his own. "But at least they got to see Donnie." "Marim, Iras, Karad, come in." There was an awkwardness about Atris's manner that was strange. It was almost as if the years between his arrival and his imminent departure had melted away, leaving them all strangers again. The three young Averonese also moved awkwardly as they stepped into the shadows of the hut, unable to meet their friends' eyes, their every gesture a denial of what was happening. This was difficult for them, more difficult than anything they'd ever done. Marim, particularly, seemed eclipsed. She was usually so bright, so full of life. Catherine, watching her from where she stood behind her husband, felt her heart go out to the young woman. It would be so hard for her to stay here. There was such a hunger in her for new things. And what was new in Averone? "Friends," Atris said as they sat on the long bench facing him. He made a tiny noise of exasperation. Then, leaning toward them, his hands extended in exhortation, said, "I wish this wasn't happening. I wish—" They were watching him now. Atris's voice, when it came again, was subdued, as if he understood that even uttering these words might not help. "I wish you could come with us. I wish that more than anything." Catherine saw the small shuddering movement in each of them. The words had touched them. It was what they wanted more than anything, and somehow, strangely, it helped them to know that Atris wanted that too. Marim looked from side to side to her friends, then spoke. "We understand." Yes, the single word sounded bleak. It all came down to this. Atris had given his word, and he could not break it. Indeed, he would not be the man he was, if that were possible. To be what one said one was, that to Atris was of the essence. And he had instilled that into these young people. With what one said, what one wrote, these things mattered as much as life and death. "I wanted to give each of you something," Atris said gently, "to remember us by." Atris stood and went across, lifting 3 small parcels from the table at the side. Catherine had noticed them earlier and guessed what they were. Books. Donny books. He returned, then leaned across the table, setting a parcel before each of them, then sat again, waiting for them to open them. But none of them made even the vaguest movement to unwrap the gifts. "Well," Atris said after a moment, clearly trying to understand what was going on. "Have I done the wrong thing?" It was Marim who answered him. "We thank you for the gifts, Master Atris, but we cannot accept them. We have finished with all that now, and we must settle here in Averone." But Catherine saw the look of longing in her eyes, quickly suppressed, and felt almost giddy at the thought of what they were doing here. Atris and she had not even begun to imagine the effect they would have on these young people. She looked away, unable to bear it any longer, yet even as she did, there was a knock on the door. Atris looked up, even as the young Averonese turned in their seats. The door swung slowly open. "Geva!" Atris said, standing and giving a tiny bow. The old man looked about him, taking in the situation at a glance. Then, with a nod to Atris and Catherine, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him.
"Forgive me for intruding," he began, "but I have come direct from a meeting of the elders."
Catherine saw the 3 young people deflate at the words. If there had been any glimmer of hope, it had died in that moment.
"They asked me to come at once," Geva continued, "before a great mistake was made."
Atris blinked, then, "You can tell the elders that I will keep my word. These presents are but a token.
"You misunderstand me, Master Atris," Geva said, interrupting him. "The mistake I am talking of is not yours, but ours. You have been as good as your word. No, we have discussed the matter at length, and are of one mind. The link must remain open."
Atris simply stared at the old man. The young people were also staring, but their eyes were bright now, and there were the ghosts of disbelieving smiles on their faces.
Averone must remain Averone, Gava said, so it is right that the workshop should be pulled down. But there have been other changes, changes that cannot be pulled down and raked over.
Gava looked at the three young people who were sitting there and smiled.
Oh, we are old, but we are not stupid. We have eyes, yes, and imaginations too. We see how you have changed, and we are proud of you, just as Master Atris is proud of you.
Catherine could not contain herself any longer. Then they can come with us to Chroma Agana and Donnie? Gava turned to her.
On one condition, that they return here 1 month in 2 to serve as teachers to our young, to pass on the skills they have learned.
And now, as one, the three jumped up, whooping elatedly and hugging each other, crying with joy. Even old Gava was included in their hugs. When things had died down, Atris asked, "What made you change your mind, Gava?" The old man smiled.
The fact that you did what you had promised you would do, and without protest. It made us think. It made us see how much we had to lose if you were gone.
Atris stood, then came round the table and embraced the old man. "Then let it be so. We shall take great care of these young people, and they will return to pass on what they know. They will make you doubly proud of them, Gava."
I know,
the old man said, stepping back, his eyes dwelling long on the three young people.
In fact, I am certain of it.
It was very late when Atris and Catherine returned to their stall in the great lodge house. Now that the link was to remain, the feast had been a merry one, all of their young helpers in such a mood that it was hard to believe that they had all just volunteered for yet more years of long and grueling work. Settling down beside Catherine, Atris yawned, then gave a small chuckle. "What now?" Catherine whispered, snuggling into his side. He looked up at the great raftered roof of the lodge house high above and grinned. "The look on Miriam's face when she finally opened her present," he whispered. "Why, you'd have thought I'd wrapped up the sun itself and given it to her." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. Then, "She's a hungry one, starving for knowledge and for strange exotic places. Oh, I know that hunger, Atris." "Yes," he said quietly, conscious of the hundreds of sleeping Avrones surrounding them. "And now she'll have a chance. We can teach her, Catherine. Teach her how to write." "Yes." Atris was silent for a long time after that. He lay there on his back, his arm curled about Catherine, unable to sleep, staring up into the dark, thinking about what lay ahead. The breakthrough to Donnie was only the first step. The real work had yet to begin, the gathering in of the books, the searching of the ages. It would be a slow, laborious task. Catherine must have sighed, though she was unaware of it. Atris lifted himself up onto one elbow and looked down into her face. "What is it?" he whispered. She met his eyes. "What if no one survived? What if we're alone?" "We won't know, not until we've tried. But I can't believe there aren't some Donnie somewhere. Can you?" She smiled, calmed by his certainty. "No." "Good," he said. We'll worry about all that in the morning." Marim, look at this! Have you ever seen the like?" Marim squeezed past Iras, then stopped dead, astonished by the sight that met her eyes. "Books!" The long, low room was filled to bursting with books, on shelves on the walls, in piles on the floor, and on both desks, even stacked up on the tall back chair that rested behind the bigger of the desks. More books than she had ever dared imagine. Why, she could spend years in this one room alone and never read half of them. She turned excited to find Atris standing there. "Master Atris!" He stepped past her, looking about him. "This was my father's room," he said. "His study." Atris walked across and lifted something from among the books on the desk. An elaborate-looking pipe. He lifted it to his nose and sniffed, then placed it back, a strange expression on his face. "He must have been a clever man," Eras offered. Atris turned. "Clever, yes." But he said no more. "There are books here," he said after a moment, his pale eyes narrowed. "Dani books. There might be functional ages in some of them. Marim, go through the shelves and the piles on the floor. Gather them together, but don't be tempted by them. Some of these worlds are dangerous. That's why we used the suit, remember? Your task is to locate them and bring them to me. Afterward, when all are gathered in, we can decide which ones to visit." The two youngsters nodded. "By the way," Atris said, "where's Karad?" "With Catherine," Eras answered. "They found a boat. They're trying to repair it." "Ah," Atris nodded, but Marim, watching him, noticed how distant he seemed. Atris was silent a moment, then, "My father was a secretive man. Maybe he has hidden things somewhere in the room. Search everything, the walls, the floors, everything." He paused. "You know what you're looking for?" "We know," Marim said. "Good," Atris nodded, then quickly left. Marim turned full circle, excited once again now that Atris had gone. "All these books," she said, looking at Eras. "Just imagine!"